Welcome back to Verano de 1711 podcast. This is Mark coming to you with another episode. Today we have a special treat for you. As you can see at the bottom, the title of this episode will be talking about Pentateuco composition, historiography, history, and whatnot. And for that, today I am joined by Professor Richard Averbeck from TETS, Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. Professor Averbeck, thank you for being here. How are you doing today?
Thank you. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, great. So, for everybody out there, this has been a long time in the making, and Professor Averbeck can attest to this better than me. But finally, we made it, and I'm glad that he is on the show. So, this is something that I've been really looking forward to speaking about because, we're going to be talking about the first five books of the Pentateuch, Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and whatnot. So we want to make sure that we understand it. This is Professor Averbeck, you can better tell us this. This has been a long question to understand how the Pentateuch came to be in the first place. And you can tell us that it's been a debate, right? You can give us
yes.
The lay of the land
intense
there.
Debate for several centuries, yeah.
and I'm almost like have a keen interest to understand the beginnings of something. In this case, the first books of the Bible. So we're going to be getting there. Okay. So, but first things first, Professor Averbeck, can you give us just a bit of a background, who you are for people who is out there who may not aware about your work, scholarly works, credentials, everything. So hit us with that first, please.
Well, I'm a professor of Old Testament and Semitic languages at Trinity. I'm now emeritus. I'm retired, and continuing to do my work of research and writing along the way. My emphasis is in the Torah, the Pentateuch, and in the world of the Torah, the ancient Near Eastern world in which the Torah came into being. And so I worked with a lot of languages, from Sumerian to Akkadian to Ugaritic to Aramaic, in being able to work in the actual original documentation of what was going on in the ancient Near East and the literature from it and the languages. And I've taught the languages like Sumerian and Akkadian, Ugaritic, Aramaic, so on. And so it's something that I've been doing for a long time now. Okay. So it's been, 50 years, more than that. So,
wow. 50 years? Wow.
Yeah.
That's a whole life. It's an entire life.
Yeah. I started teaching in 1980. And so I did my PhD work in seminary before that, and then did my dissertation while I was starting to teach, and all sorts of things are in the background there. But I've had tremendous opportunities to serve the Lord in this way as a scholar in the field, try to do the heavy lifting for the church in these areas.
Thank you, and I'm glad for that. And this is something that you can see on the motto of my podcast, the Latin maxima there. Intellect searching, faith in search of intellect. So I don't see myself a problem, and you can better tell us this, Professor Averbeck. There's no issue. There's not really an issue here or contention between the academic life of a person and their Christian faith. It hasn't been. I mean, my faith journey, I can tell you, the more I understand, with the help of the scholars out there, my faith gets strengthened, and that's something that we really appreciate from you guys. And that's basically one of the main reasons we do this. So thank you for that, Professor Averbeck. Let's go and hit the first question, people. You're going to be seeing there in your screen. So, Professor Averbeck, could you tell us about the latest approaches to the study of the Pentateuch and why it matters?
Well, the Pentateuch is actually, of course, the foundation of the Bible, and therefore the foundation of our faith. And we are dependent upon it for the rest of the Old Testament and the New Testament. So it was considered scripture and still is scripture. And we thank the Lord for revealing himself to us through it. So this is about God's revelation of himself to us. The Bible was a Bible. God was God long before there was a Bible, and we were around before there was a Bible. But the whole point of the Bible is the relationship between God and us, and how we fit into his created world
Yeah.
in his image and likeness. So that's really the foundation. And there are lots of different approaches that are used in this field from people that some of who have faith and some who don't. And this is a very complex world, a lot of different views from the composition of the Pentateuch. How did it get composed? We have the documentary hypothesis of Julius Wellhausen and before him, and then up till today, and a new form of that called a neo-documentary hypothesis now. We also have redaction critical approaches that come from a different angle at the composition of the Pentateuch. And the historical critical method itself that we're referring to cut its teeth really on Genesis and the Pentateuch. So this is why it's so important, and we have to try to understand it in a way that is intellectually honest, but also know that just like the world is fallen, so is scholarship. So there's lots of contradiction, lots of pluralism, a lot of different ways people come at this in bringing their mind to this discussion. So there's the standard historical critical approaches that I've just mentioned, but there's also a literary approach to the Bible that just works with the Bible as literature and is not really interested in history or theology, just how it works as literature and its effect on Western literature, and so on. So, and then there's others like myself. I did a lot of ancient Near Eastern studies in order to get into the study of the Old Testament more deeply. And that is another whole approach that some scholars are focused on. Others are focused on theological interpretation of the scriptures, whether they're consistent or not, all these kinds of questions that keep getting raised. Still others are interested in social and anthropological approaches to the Bible, and even feminist and post-colonial approaches where it's not so much that the Bible's any kind of authoritative text. It's often used just to reflect on and even critique the Bible culturally. So it's different people are coming at this in very different ways. I come at it as a man of faith in Jesus Christ and as someone who really believes that the Bible is God's revelation to us. But I come at it with open eyes toward all the data that's available in the Bible and external to the Bible in the world of the Bible in such a way as to try to orient. That's why I do ancient Near Eastern studies, to kind of get me oriented to the Bible and not bring my own culture to it, but the culture that it was written in order to understand and therefore bring that across into my culture and into the church. So I think that's probably a fair response. There's a whole group of people that come at it from my perspective. We have meetings and so on and so forth to talk about composition of the Pentateuch and so on. A lot of books are being published in this regard. So it's a big field. And so you have different kinds of societies. One evangelical theological society where evangelicals will come to this discussion, and then Society of Biblical Literature, which is much more broad in the whole academic world, including the ancient Near East and the Hebrew Bible and all sorts of other religious concerns from study of religion today and so on. So this is really a large area of discussion today.
Thank you, Professor Averbeck. It is indeed. It is indeed. And, there's a lot of debate about this going on. Not only, how long has it been, Professor Averbeck? 200 years? I mean,
well, it goes
Wellhausen
back
came
to
up
the
with it.
16. It goes way back
Yeah.
to the 1600s, and even
Spinoza.
before that. in
Yeah,
some
yeah.
ways, but it goes back to Baruch Spinoza in the 1600s and all the way up, and Wellhausen in the 19th century, the 1800s, developed it. It came kind of to a peak there, and Wellhausen's system of the documentary hypothesis controlled the field of Old Testament studies in the academic world for a while, and is still alive and well in certain forms. So there's, it's been since the 1600s, and actually there was some precursors to that even before that.
Thank you. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Okay, let's move on here with the second question. So, Professor Averbeck, could you give us an overview of the documentary hypothesis, its history, main proponents, pros and cons, and is it correct to affirm that sometimes source critics overstate the data?
Yes, it is correct that they
Yeah,
sometimes overstate the data, and some of them will admit that.
yeah,
Even
yeah.
they're speculating, and they know that. Others are much more dogmatic about what they think happened. It depends on the people, the kind of personality and the way they're coming at it, and how convinced they are in one way or another. But basically, the documentary hypothesis, as it's commonly known and still taught many times in universities and so on, is that there were different documents that were brought together in composing of the current Pentateuch. One was this is called the JEDP theory. And in it, J is the Yahwist, sometimes pronounced Jehovah, but that's not correct. But this is in the 9th century BC, 800s. The Jehovah's wrote, and he used in his composition, for example, of Genesis, he used the name Yahweh because he knew that name, and he used that name to talk about the Lord. Then there's an E, JEDP. The E is for the Elohist, one who used the name Elohim rather than Yahweh, and did not even use the name Yahweh, say in the book of Genesis, before we get to Exodus when it's revealed, according to the E document. And the E is often thought of from a kind of a northern kingdom, northern Israel, rather than Judean sources, a lot of it. And then there's D, and D stands for Deuteronomy. And that's the book of Deuteronomy, or the original form of that book. And that was supposed to have been written by Moses according to the Bible. But critical theory argues largely that it comes from the time of Josiah in the 700s, who made these reforms, and the book of Deuteronomy was written as background or as a context for Josiah's reforms, reinforcing his reforms to worship the Lord only and not other gods in that day. And then there's P, and one of the main results of Wellhausen's work is he ended up believing that P, that is the priestly material of the Pentateuch, like Leviticus and Exodus and Numbers and different parts of Genesis, that material was written in the exilic or post-exilic period, when they were in Babylonian exile, time of Daniel, so on, and that it was written last. It was not really written by Moses at all. In fact, there's a lot of questions raised about whether there ever was a Moses in this discussion. And so what happens is this is some of the core stuff in the Pentateuch is actually said to be the latest material written in the Pentateuch, long after, a millennium after Moses. So this is kind of the framework of the standard documentary hypothesis. Today, there's a new form called neo-documentary hypothesis, in which a lot of the things Julius Wellhausen had a negative view of the P material. It was too Jewish and so on. And so he thought it was late. And so he pushed back and thought it was late, and that it was kind of a way that they took and the earlier prophets and shaped the material for their priestly concerns in the post-exilic period with the rebuilding of the temple. So this is all tied up in history and theology and different stages where Wellhausen put P last, which really turned things around, okay, in terms of the way people think about how the Pentateuch was written.
Thank you, Professor Averbeck. Now, you said anti-Jewish on behalf of Wellhausen. So, is that a good? I mean, can we say that he was an anti-Semite person, or that would be
Well, he
taken too
felt like
far?
I would say he was anti-Jewish. Okay,
Okay.
he in terms of the later development of Judaism, okay,
Hmm.
after the
Yeah.
exile, and that he felt like it was such a rigid form of writing and theology that it kind of undid the lively prophetic message that was there
Hmm.
before it, and the message of the prophets, kind of the lively faith. And so it kind of, to Wellhausen, it was like a kind of taking over of the priests. The priests took over the whole system and rewrote things according to their pattern. Now, the neo-documentary hypothesis today is not nearly as negative about P, or negative at all about P. It is a different kind of documentary hypothesis, but they still believe in these documents that ran through and gave different forms of the Pentateuch, or parts of it, and that was combined then by redactors along the way, and eventually it ended up being the Pentateuch that we have today.
You know, recently I heard an interview. I was watching this interview between John Bergsma. He's a Catholic scholar,
Mm-hmm.
and he was interviewing Gary Rensburg
Yes.
from
Mm-hmm.
Rutgers
I know
University.
both of those men pretty well.
I know you do. I know that's why
Mm-hmm.
I'm bringing it up. And you know, Rensburg made the announcement. Perhaps I don't know if somebody else was aware of this, but he made the announcement that he's coming. He has a book coming out this year where they are. This is like he didn't say it, but the way I understood it, this is my rendering of his statement. It's basically to demolish the documentary hypothesis remains, and they put it together a heavyweighty group of scholars. And on Facebook, I posted about this book because it looks amazing. It's being published by Hendrickson Publishers, and Professor Seth Sanders, he made a comment. You know, this is a debate that is being raging from wow many years, and I'm like, yeah. But the reason I'm posting this is because I'm hoping and I want to see what the new things they're bringing into the table of discussion. Uh, so I'm that's my expectation. But the reason I'm mentioning Gary Rensburg, Professor Averbeck, is because he says that Bellhausen actually he has something. I'm not sure he was like this, but he holds some grudge against Catholic Church, and that would be another how to put it. That would be another reason why. I mean, they were like shooting right at the Pentateuch, but it's the foundation narratives, and he was very very blunt about this, but he said, you know, I no longer read anything the neo documentaries are publishing. I have no interest in reading anything. And I'm like, hold up, what's going on? That was very very blunt of him to say it, but I mean he's a scholar, he can go on and say it. And
Uh-huh.
then he said about the neo documentary position, what's new in it?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, oh my goodness, this is getting good. But again, Professor Averbeck, uh, I remember Heiser. He was not. I mean, he was not fond of the documentary hypothesis.
No.
He said that it was tautological. It was circular reasoning.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he
Yes.
said on his podcast.
Yeah.
And yeah, go ahead. You have something to add there.
Well, um, John Bergsma and Gary Rensburg, I'm in the same group they're in, and we have
Okay.
conferences and we have discussions and we work through papers and we publish books, and we've got a couple books out already, and there's
Yeah.
one that we're writing that might be what Gary Rensburg was referring to, rethinking the composition of the Pentateuch.
That's the one. Yeah.
And
That's the one.
that is one where all of us has kind of contributed different smaller chapters to kind of introduce the discussion and our response to it. So yes, there is a lot of rancor in this whole discussion. A lot of people get angry very quickly and so on. And because they hold positions and they want people to believe what they believe and so on. But the fact of the matter is that there is a whole need for paradigm change in the study of the composition of the Pentateuch. And in fact, there's a book that's written on that. I have an essay in it in terms of paradigm change that needs to be happening in this field, which large parts of the field are going to reject any kind of paradigm change. And that is just, it's part of the academic world battle that goes on all the time. But the difference in terms of the neo-documentary, one of the differences is that they are not as negative toward Judaism as later Judaism, like Wellhausen was. And so they push back against that and might have an earlier P and so on and so forth. So there are differences from Wellhausen's form of the documentary hypothesis. That's why they call it neo-documentary hypothesis.
Thank you. This is a book that you were in. You made a contribution in this book. Now look at the title for the people watching this interview: Paradigm Change in Pentateuch Research. And now this, the portion that I put right there, Dr. Averbeck, this is from Georg Fischer, if I'm not mistaken. I hope I'm not butchering his last name. But he says, this is the situation we face today. The number of publications in the field outweighs by far what a scholar is able to read. As a result, any new contribution will always be deficient, inevitably failing to take into account many other studies which might be relevant to the topic. More fundamentally, he says, there is a dichotomy in the approaches to Pentateuchal studies. The opposition between the diachronic methodologies and synchronic access to the texts leads to two parallel worlds whose representatives are often critical and suspicious with respect to positions of the other side. I know what he means. Sometimes even hostile or dismissive right from the outset. I think that's a good extract from about this issue, about the documentary hypothesis. This is a debate. Again, if you want to, the main takeaway, people, this is a debate, But I read the other day, Professor Averbeck, Thomas Romer, The Invention of God, and he says that continental European scholarship, he's moving, from the classical and documentary hypothesis position. And is it true that there are varieties of the documentary position? Or is it just one monolithic?
Okay. But there are varieties, but there's another whole position aside from the documentary position. It's called redaction critical approach to the Bible. And this is where they start and they do it a completely different way. In the documentary hypothesis, you're looking at parallel strands that run through the Pentateuch, and they're combined by redaction, and we end up with the Pentateuch. In the redaction critical approach, they start more with the smaller units, the oral, what they consider to be the oral background units, Hermann Gunkel's form criticism, and that each unit of tradition is a separate unit and treated in that way. And then they go from these smaller units of traditions, specific story about Abraham or a specific story about Jacob or whatever, and those then get combined in what we call tradition criticism, where they put the stories about Abraham together, and then they put the stories about Jacob together, and so on. And then they have whole units then of traditions about them, and then they come to redaction criticism. So there's oral tradition and then redaction criticism, and they call it the redaction critical approach because there at that point you're talking about how it got written down, how it got actually composed into literature, in pulling all of these traditions together and creating, therefore, over time, the text as we have it. So it's a totally different. It's not going across. It's not whole strands on through. It's more particular units, building up units and then putting those units together. It's much more that sort of a project, in their opinion. So these are very different, and there's a lot of conflict between the writers in these different positions. And sometimes I go to sessions at Society of Biblical Literature, and you'll have them battling each other. And, it's actually kind of interesting to hear how people are applying their minds to this wonderful Bible that we have in trying to understand it in their more humanistic ways, and as a product of human thinking. Some will allow some kind of understanding of inspiration, others won't, divine inspiration and so on. It's very, very mixed. And and some are even think that what we should be doing is criticizing the Bible, and literally criticizing the Bible. It's not just criticism, but criticizing. And they really do come at different things in it that they consider to be really wrong, whether feminist or post-colonial or whatever. And so this is a very mixed up field that way, and there get to be some pretty hot arguments about it.
Thank you. I forgot to mention John Bergsman's book on this, which is murmuring. I think it's murmuring against Moses. I think.
Yeah,
is the
murmuring
title.
against Moses.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's the other one. So I put some links and screenshots about this book for anyone who's interested. I mean, if you are interested in this kind of topics and you wanted to, get the best of scholarship, I think you need to get a hold of that. Now, going more forward here, Professor Averbeck, the editors add something here regarding your contribution, which I think is worth highlighting here. They say, let me put it right here. Oh, I forgot it. There you go. Oh, what is it? I forgot it. Oh, there you go. So they say, in Richard Averbeck's contribution entitled Reading the Torah a Better Way, Unity Amid Diversity in Text, Genre, and Compositional History. Here, general methodological considerations are combined with an attempt to find new ways in understanding the patriarchal stories. And for those who know, the patriarchal stories, they're in the target of this position, the documentary hypothesis. So continues. Averbeck begins with a review of the two dominant theories of the composition of the Pentateuch in the academy today: the neo-documentary and the non-documentary redactional approaches. Thank you for that. It finds them lacking sound, rationale, and application to the text. What is needed, according to Averbeck, is a radical shift in the reading of the text for its compositional prehistory. Any comments on that, Professor Averbeck?
Yes, that actually, and what I developed in that article, that's my initial writing on this particular topic, is thinking about Genesis in particular, and what we call genealogical history, where you have, if you look at the culture of the patriarchs, they didn't do history by national history because they weren't a nation. They were families, clans, tribal groups, and they lived in tents in Israel, and they were in what we call enclosed nomadic pastoralists who moved their flocks around to find pasture, and they lived in tents and so on. They didn't live as a nation, but as ethnic group, as a set of clans that develop into tribes and so on and so forth. And they do history by genealogy, by the genealogy of the family. And this genealogical history gets reflected, I'm arguing, in the way Genesis is written, using the generations formula. These are the generations of throughout the book as a way of anchoring the stories in the genealogical context of the people. And so it's a different kind of genre of history writing that is often used in the historical critical discussion, and needs to be brought in to really kind of sort some things out and used to talk about. Now, my point is, I don't believe in neo-documentary hypothesis, nor do I really believe in the redaction critical process. I do believe that there was redaction, things were put together, and so on and so forth. But the reality is that in terms of actual composition, I think this was put together as a particular genre. The genre of genealogical history kind of shapes the whole book, and there's a lot to say about that, and I keep writing in this area. But the point is that that is not taken nearly enough into consideration when we think about if the Pentateuch did not get written according to the documentary or redaction critical approaches, how did it actually get written? In other words, a positive approach to, okay, then how did God work it in such a way that the text as we now have it came into being? So it's more of a, I'm critical of some approaches, but I'm also trying to produce an understanding of, if it's not that, what is it? How does it get written in terms of God as inspiring writers to write it in their own language? All of this kind of discussion about the writing of the revelation that we have.
Thank you, Professor Averbeck. Let's move on here with the following question. It's showing up on the screen. So what's the difference between, I like this one. What's the difference between history and ancient historiography? Mouthful for me. And in what ways the Hebrew Bible authors make use of these two literary forms?
Well, this is a question that I've worked on quite a bit in terms of historiography. History is actually what happened, okay, in the situations in the ancient time. It's historicity, you might call it. Okay, that's about what happened in history. Historiography is how history gets written about. Okay, so in ancient Israel, they did a certain kind of historiography, the genealogical historiography that I was just talking about. And that's important to understanding how they thought about their history and how God then incorporated that into a revelation of the people and God's work with them in history. So this is all part of an issue of the kind of material that we have in the Bible. There's historicity, what things actually happened, and then there's how they got written about. And it's important to remember that the same historical happenings, historical events, can be written about from different angles. Okay, like even in the Gospels in the New Testament, you have 4 Gospels. Well, you can shape the story of Jesus in different ways, and it still be a true story. You can emphasize this, shift this, that, so on and so forth, in such a way as that it works out that way.
Yeah, thank you for that. This is another point of contention here, because we are recurrently bringing modern sensitivities into ancient texts. And many people is getting frustrated because, no, I want to see this because the history should be written this way,
Mm-hmm.
And then they impose those kind of, what do you call it? Requisites onto the Bible, because it's ancient literature as well. Okay, and we Christians, we also believe this. It's the inspired word of God. But my point here, as a layman, someone who tries to to do my homework, this, we're talking about ancient literature here, and the way they didn't care about what do you call it, authority. I don't know what's the word in English, but something has to do with intellectual propriety. Propriety, I think it is. They didn't care about that. They didn't care to put, written by who and who.
Oh, yeah.
They just didn't do that. And you can what can you tell us about that, Professor Averbeck? It's different than us in modern times.
Yes, they had. I actually worked on this on historiography way back in Sumerian times in the third millennium BC, long before Moses and before Abraham, and
Wow.
and did some historiography work on very early pre-Sargonic historiographical compositions. And
Mhm.
they did history. History is always written from a particular perspective, and that includes theological thinking about the gods and so on and
Yeah.
so forth. And when they use that the Bible has theology about God, therefore it's not real history, that's completely wrong. That's how history was written in that day, and we don't have any history from them if we don't have that kind of history. And so the result is there's a lot of problems with the way they apply these concepts to the text, kind of imposing Western thinking on a text that's really Eastern. Now, the one of the books that's really helpful in this is Joshua Berman's book. He's a Jewish scholar who's part of the group that I was talking about that's working on rethinking the composition of the Pentateuch. Joshua Berman, he has a book entitled Inconsistency in the Torah, in which he goes through and shows how what is often considered to be inconsistency or contradiction or incoherence really wouldn't be in that cultural context. So he's trying to go back and read it from a perspective of how they wrote and how they thought. And that's what you're bringing up. And I think that that's a very important book for this discussion.
Actually, he has a contribution on that book that I showed previously. I
Mm-hmm.
think it has to do with the limits of source criticism. So yeah, I've been recommended that book as well.
Yeah, that
Definitely.
we did a conference in Basel, Switzerland.
Yeah, yeah,
That book came out of that conference, and
that
he was
exactly.
there with me at that conference with other scholars of different sorts.
Okay, now something question popped up here on my mind. They say that they bring many people from different fields, right? And they brought a Assyriologist. I don't remember. I mean, for the life of me, I can't recall what Syriology was there, what Syriologist professional was there. Do you remember what guy or person was there from that field in this conference?
Which conference? The one in Basel? Are you
In
talking?
Basel, yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that one.
Well, a number of us were there who work in ancient Near Eastern literature in applying it to our understanding of the Hebrew Bible. And I'm one of them. Joshua Berman works in that area. There are others. Gary Rensburg does a lot of work in this area, but he was not at that particular conference. John Bergsma was there. And actually, a German scholar who's a redaction critical scholar, Eckhart Otto, was there. So there was a lot of great interaction through this time. So it was a very important um, conference that was part of getting this whole discussion going in a significant way.
Thank you. Let's move on here. So we're doing good with the questions here. Question number 4, Professor Averbeck, can you provide some examples of intertextuality within the Pentateuch? Is it correct to argue for one single theology, or should we look at for a set of theologies running from Genesis to the Deuteronomy? Let me tell you, I need to be honest with you. This is intentional on my part. I remember because Heiser was asked about intertextuality, and many people out there they go crazy trying to find intertextuality with the Hebrew Bible. There is, in fact, I can acknowledge that phenomena, but to what extent, Professor Eberbeck, is that possible?
Well, it's yes, you're going to have um, sacrifice coming from different perspectives because the the tabernacle wasn't built until the time of Moses, and the patriarchs are before that. So they're going to be doing their sacrifices differently to some extent than what we get when Moses sets it out how we're going to do this in the tabernacle that we built there at Sinai. So you're going to get differences, but then there's other differences too. For example, Leviticus is written in the context of Sinai, and they're going to be moving from Sinai to go to the promised land. And the tabernacle is a tented structure that God was going to use to go from Sinai, which is called the mountain of God, to the promised land with them, to walk with them. He's going to have his tent amongst their tents. The tabernacle is like a movable Sinai. And so he walks with them. And he talks about this even Leviticus 26, that he's going to walk with them to the promised land. And so in that context, when all the people are in a wilderness camp and they're around the tabernacle, if they're going to eat meat, they have to bring the animal to, this is Leviticus 17, they have to bring the animal to the tabernacle to put the fat and the blood on the altar, and then they can take it. This is a peace offering. They can take it and they can eat it as food for their family. And if they didn't do that, they were violating the law, because God didn't want them to sacrifice to demons and so on in the wilderness. So that was the regulation. If you're going to eat meat, you have to bring it to the tabernacle first, okay, and put the blood on the altar and so on. Well, Deuteronomy is 40 years later, and now they're going to be entering into the promised land, and they're going to be spread out in the promised land. So they're not going to all be right around the tabernacle where it is, and then later the temple. So if they were going to eat meat for dinner tonight, they would have to, they wouldn't have to travel 20, 30 miles to the temple and then come back and eat it. They treated it, and this is in Deuteronomy 12, they treated it in such a way that now what you can do is you can slaughter the animal as if it's wild game and pour the blood out on the ground, get dust over it, and so on. You don't eat the blood, okay? And then anybody can eat it that wants to eat it. It's called profane slaughter. That was not possible while they were around the tabernacle. But now in the land, they couldn't do what they could do when they were all living right around the tabernacle. So this was changed. There's actual changes within the law because the situation of the people of ancient Israel changed. They were going to be in the promised land spread out rather than around the tabernacle. There are other such changes, and this is intertextuality, where there's a difference, but there's a difference for a reason. God is adjusting his regulations for the circumstances and situation of his people. And this is an ongoing thing in the Old Testament where adjustments had to be made for changes and so on. And what happens is this all comes through into the New Testament where we're in the new covenant, but the law is written on the heart, Jeremiah 31. And so in this context, there's going to be different kinds of things. The sacrifice is that of Christ for the new covenant, and there's no more sacrifice for sin. He did it once for all, and so on. And it's all built off of understanding the Old Testament system. And we can see this clearly, for example, in Hebrews 9 and 10. Well, what I'm getting at is there are going to be these kinds of adjustments to the regulations because the situation of the people changes and God adjusts for that. There are other kinds of parallels, like in Leviticus 1 through 5, you have the regulations for the burnt, grain, peace, sin, and guilt offerings, the 5 major kinds of offerings. And you have a lot of regulations there, but you have Numbers 15, you have regulations for if you bring a burnt offering, a peace offering, what kind of grain offering you have to bring, what kind of libation do you have to bring, drink offering, and so on. So this is all, not all the regulations are all given in the same place and from the same perspective. This is just part of the way the text was put together. And but there's different angles, different shifts, and so on. But there's one theology overall. But then different theological points are made in different places. Again, very much like the Gospels in the New Testament, where you have the parallels, but also some adjustments for how the parallels are put in and so on. This is called the synoptic issue, and we have it in the Old Testament too.
Thank you for that. I was reading the other day Introduction to the Hebrew Bible from Professor John J. Collins, and when he came to the documentary hypothesis section, I was eager to read what he has to say about it. And he said that some scholars decided to focus on the final form because there are these scholars don't see like it's productive to be focused on how the different composite parts came to be. They want to focus on the final form.
Mm-hmm.
So the reason I'm saying this to you is because intertextuality is a byproduct of redaction, years and years of redaction. Can we say that, or it's a little bit overstated, Professor Averbeck?
It's not just that. Intertextuality includes adjustments that God himself made, getting recorded in the text, and then how they're put together by people who write it too. So it's a
Okay.
combination.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. I think we're doing great, and we're getting here the final question. Let me put it right here.
Mhm.
So basically, this one has to do with what kind of literature would you recommend as further reading for anyone interested in going deeper in Pentateuch research and ancient historiography?
Well, the literature is vast, as that quote you
I
wrote,
know.
you
Yeah.
read
Yeah.
says. I would suggest a good way to start, if you're wanting to see what's going on in the field and maybe what we should do with what's going on in the field, in terms of those who consider the text to be reliable, which I do. I think Joshua Berman, he's a Jewish scholar, and he's involved in this group, and he's got this book that I mentioned earlier, Inconsistency in the Torah. It's a very good book for getting into why people are reading it wrongly when they try to impose Western thinking on the text and Western ways of writing and so on. That's useful. This book that you cited, Paradigm Change in Pentateuchal Research, is, I think, another important volume. We have these volumes coming out from, there are a series of volumes coming out on exploring the composition of the Pentateuch. 2 of them are out and more are coming. And then this rethinking the composition of the Pentateuch that we're looking forward to coming out soon is also something that would really be helpful. Another place to look is I would just suggest the InterVarsity Dictionary of the Old Testament. It's several volumes, and one section is on the Pentateuch, and in there you'll see major scholars who are writing about compositional history and ancient Near Eastern context and all these different literary approaches and so on. Plus just articles. I wrote 2 articles in there, one on offerings and sacrifices and the other one on the tabernacle. And they're both major articles in there. And these are, but this is a good dictionary set on the Old Testament, and the volume on the Pentateuch is good. So those are the kinds of things I think I would recommend for people if they want to get into this in this historical critical context.
Thank you, Professor Everett. There you have it. You can go. What I'm going to do is I'm going to be dropping the links there for everyone, anyone who is interested, so they can click on it and go and watch all those books that Professor Everett just mentioned. Now, I'm going to be adding some links there for anyone who's interested, so you can go and get your own copy for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So, Professor Averbeck, these are all the questions. I think this is a very basic for anyone who wants to take a very overall understanding what's going on in Pentateuchal research. And that debate is not over. We wish it were. I don't think it's, but the scholars. That's why they are scholars. They're always bringing something new to the discussion here, and we want to do our homework and be as much as possible informed what's going on in academic circles. Again, don't be discouraged. Okay. One thing that I learned from my mentor is that you need to read both sides of the debate. Okay, you need to try to the best of your ability, to read them, understand what they're reading, because what they're writing. Sorry, because it's not just a matter of getting the answers that I want from the beginning. No, there are really good arguments out there that we need to really spend a lot of time on those arguments and propositions they're bringing into the table. Final remarks, Professor Averbeck, for this topic that we just had in this episode.
Well, thank you for the good discussion. You've raised good questions and you've kind of guided along very well. I appreciate that, and I've enjoyed being with you.
Thank you, sir. So everybody out there, you can see that we had the Pistis Orientalia. I just want to let you know in advance, Professor Averbeck is part of the scholars that we are assembling to talk about specifically about, Sumerian and, anything related to the ancient Near East spectrum. He is expert, as he said from the get-go, in various Semitic languages, Sumerian and everything. So he's definitely the guy that we need to talk to. And we're going to be just giving the announcement when we have everything ready. For now, I just want to give him some time to better prepare himself for the topic we're going to have on that moment. So with myself and Professor Averbeck, we'd say until the next time, take care. Bye now.